Alexandria, Egypt, late 1960s. The ground trembles just enough to rattle glass and knock a single framed picture off a cafe wall. People spill into the narrow streets barefoot, clutching children, Qurans, and house keys, faces turned upward as if the sky, not the earth, is betraying them. Sirens scream across one district, not the whole city, repeating the same words in Arabic over and over. This is not a drill. Evacuate to the schoolyard. Move now if you want to live. In the middle of this chaos, 3 men in civil defense armbands push a bewildered Soviet scientist toward an idling truck, shouting that they are taking him to safety, while everyone else runs the opposite way. Only years later will anyone in the intelligence world admit that this earthquake never happened, that the tremor was man-made, and the panic was a cover for a single surgical kidnapping called Operation Fault Line. Before we go any further, I want you to put yourself on that street for a second. If you felt the ground move in the middle of the night and heard the sirens telling you to run, would you stay inside and trust the walls, or rush out into the chaos with everyone else? Pause the video for a moment and tell me in the comments what your instinct says, because by the end of this story, you are going to see how that split-second decision is exactly what Mossad weaponized. To the families who lived through that night, it was a scare story to tell their grandchildren about the time the earth shook only in their neighborhood. To Mossad, it was a carefully scripted illusion designed to steal one man out from under Soviet protection without firing a single public shot. To his neighbors in Odessa, Leonid Sokolov had once been the quiet boy who fixed broken radios and sneaked extra bread from the factory for his younger sister. To the Soviet state, as he grew older, he became something far more valuable than a clever child. A seismologist who could read the language of the earth, and later, a mathematician who learned how to turn that language into guidance algorithms for medium-range missiles. On paper, he was a civilian scientist, a man who studied tremors and fault lines. In reality, he sat at the fault line between natural forces and man-made destruction, helping rockets find their way more accurately over long distances. In Tel Aviv, his name did not appear on television or in newspapers. It appeared on a different kind of list, typed in quiet rooms under fluorescent lights. Analysts in Israeli military intelligence first noticed him when cables from Eastern Europe mentioned a consultant whose work had increased the reliability of test launches. They watched his trail as he disappeared from an institute near the Black Sea and reappeared months later in Egypt, embedded with a Soviet seismic research unit on the Mediterranean coast. To Egyptian officials, he was a foreign expert helping install early warning earthquake sensors. To Mossad, he was a ticking problem. If he stayed where he was, his algorithms would likely guide missiles that could one day arc over the desert and fall on Tel Aviv or Haifa with far fewer misses. Eliminating him outright would be loud, provocative, and morally easy. Capturing him alive, turning his knowledge, and doing it inside a proud Arab capital hosted by Soviet advisors would be something else entirely. Deep in the bureaucracy, men argued about it in low voices. Was the risk worth it? Or would a botched grab trigger a diplomatic earthquake bigger than anything Sokolov could ever measure? In the end, his name slid upward onto a short, cold list. People whose removal might change not just the battle, but the shape of a future war. The file that carried his name acquired a codename that sounded like nothing at all: Operation Fault Line. It was a sterile title for a decision that, if mishandled, could cost lives far beyond one captured scientist and one shaken city. Long before the night of the fake tremor, Alexandria had already become a map on a wall in Tel Aviv, red string and ink connecting docks, consulates, safe houses, and dull gray government offices. Mossad did not start with the earthquake idea. They started the way they always did, by watching how a man lived. Under one cover identity, an officer named Yossi arrived in the city as a Jewish-born in Egypt businessman who never left after the wars. He spent humid evenings in cafes listening to the hiss of local radio reports about new Soviet advisors and seismic projects on the coast, pretending not to care while every phrase about safety, drills, and sensors slid into his memory. Another officer, Dahlia, slipped into the Italian quarter as a cleaning woman, mopping floors in a building that shared a thin wall with the Soviet compound where Sokolov worked. Through those walls and through open courtyard windows, she learned his rhythm, the way you learn the sea by watching its tides. Mornings, he walked the courtyard with a stack of papers and a steaming cup, a guard 2 steps behind. Afternoons disappeared into a basement lab full of humming equipment. Evenings, he sat alone in a small office, the same lamp burning until midnight, the same guard yawning in the hallway. Mossad was not just tracking where he went, they were tracking when he relaxed, when his guards got bored enough to lean against a wall, when the compound's gate was most often left slightly open for deliveries. At the same time, a different kind of pattern was being studied: the behavior of an entire population under civil defense rules. The city had pamphlets teaching people what to do during an earthquake: follow the sirens, move to the designated schoolyard, trust that whoever controlled the loudspeakers knew best. Drills had been promised, posters printed, fear seeded in speeches about someday when the big one comes. That fear lodged itself quietly in people's minds. Mossad officers collected those pamphlets like intelligence, gold, because they recognized something raw in them: a ready-made script sitting in every kitchen drawer waiting to be used. By the time the first engineer in Tel Aviv suggested using controlled ground vibration to mimic a small tremor, the human component of the plan was already mapped. The city did not know it, but its people had rehearsed their roles for years in advance. Inside a nondescript villa outside Tel Aviv, the word impossible was banned for the duration of the planning meetings. Around a long table sat a mix you almost never see in one room: field officers with sunburned necks, engineers with ink-stained fingers, and a seismologist who had spent her youth chasing after real earthquakes, not planning fake ones. On the wall hung photographs of Alexandria's streets and a hand-drawn sketch of the Soviet compound next to the local civil defense building with its rusted siren tower. An engineer named Noam wheeled in a device, borrowed and heavily modified from oil exploration crews: a Vibrosi's platform that could send low-frequency waves into the ground. In the oil fields, it helped map what lay beneath. Here, if pushed far enough, it could make the surface tremble just enough for humans to feel, without leaving a seismograph signature that screamed sabotage. They tested it on the villa's reinforced floor, glasses clinking and dust sifting when Noam slowly turned the power up. The seismologist, Dr. Rivka Harel, folded her arms and asked the question no one wanted to hear: what happens if the Soviets read this as unnatural on their instruments? The answer was simple and brutal. By the time any Soviet technician in Alexandria compared the wave pattern to a textbook, the operation would have to be already over and the team on the water. So the planners built their timeline backward, a window of only a few minutes where the Vibrosi's would be active, the sirens blaring, and the targeted district in motion. They layered in deception. Yossi would infiltrate the civil defense building as an Italian electrician, fixing faulty wiring, quietly rerouting a test line so that on a chosen night, a Mossad microphone, not the duty officer, would control the siren announcer's voice in that district. Dahlia and others would secure covers that gave them uniforms and armbands identical to local emergency staff. A warehouse near the harbor would be rented under a fake company name, its concrete floor thick enough to absorb the machine and generator noise, while still transmitting vibration along the right slice of ground toward the Soviet compound. Eitan, the operation commander, forced them to game out ugly contingencies. What if the tremor cracked an old gas pipe and started a fire? What if a child was crushed in a stampede running to the schoolyard? What if Sokolov refused to move at all and stayed at his desk while the building shook? Each nightmare scenario was met with a rule: limit the amplitude to a small range, keep the fake quake short, target only one district so ambulances from other neighborhoods could respond if something went wrong. They rehearsed, not in full scale but in thought, running through possibilities late into the night until Operation Faultline existed as clearly in their minds as a film they had already watched. Underneath all the technical talk ran a quieter tension. They were about to weaponize fear of of a natural disaster, and there was no way to do that without scaring innocent people. The question was not whether there would be fear, but how much and for how long. The chosen night came heavy with humidity, clouds hiding the stars, the air smelling of salt, petrol, and something electric. In the rented warehouse, the metal bulk of the vibrosis machine loomed in dim light, cables spilling into a generator that coughed and settled into a steady roar. Noam stood over the controls, headphones around his neck, eyes fixed on a gauge that would tell him when the ground was whispering and when it was shouting. Across the city, a van idled in an alley near the Civil Defense Building, its driver, Rafi, wearing a perfectly copied armband and holding a microphone patched into the rerouted siren line. Closer to the Soviet compound, Dahlia crouched in the dark behind a low wall, watching the gate through borrowed binoculars, every sense tuned to the feel of the street under her feet. On a secure radio net that would sound like random fishing chatter to anyone who stumbled on it, the team checked in. When Eitan's calm voice said the words they had been waiting for, Noam eased the lever forward. The machine growled and sent the first low wave into the earth. At first, almost nothing. Somewhere between the warehouse and the compound, a loose pane rattled, a dog whined, a half-asleep shopkeeper frowned and wondered if he dreamed it. Dahlia felt a faint shift under her boots, like standing on a train platform as a slow freight rolls past. She asked for a little more. Noam nudged the power and watched the gauge rise. This time, cups clinked in their saucers. A toy car rolled a few centimeters across a living room floor. In the Civil Defense Office, a small mechanical needle jittered on a basic seismograph, enough for the duty officer to squint, then look at the wall where emergency procedures were pinned. He moved toward the radio. That was the cue. Before his hand reached the microphone, Rafi flipped his own switch in the van, hijacking the line. On cue, Noam pushed the machine into the narrow band Dr. Harrell had drawn in red pencil, where human nerves would scream but structures would mostly hold. The ground shivered in a way no one could ignore. Bottles toppled. A balcony plant crashed onto the street. A woman screamed that the world was ending. Sirens erupted, slicing through the night with that mechanical wail designed to bypass thought and go straight to the spine. Into that sound, Rafi poured his voice in calm, authoritative Arabic, using the exact phrases from the civil defense pamphlets. This is not a drill. Evacuate now. Move to the schoolyard. Keep away from walls. Fear that had been practiced suddenly became real. People flooded from apartments in nightclothes, clutching children in documents, moving in the direction the loudspeakers ordered. Inside the Soviet compound, the tremor turned already suspicious men into panicked ones. Lamps swung wildly, plaster cracked, and somewhere a pipe groaned. The commander ordered everyone into the courtyard. Sokolov stumbled out with a briefcase of notes and years of work. Guards shouted at one another in Russian and Arabic, trying to herd their precious asset and their own fear at the same time. When a woman in a civil defense armband appeared at the gate, shouting that the schoolyard was over capacity and that priority evacuees, like the foreign advisor, had to be moved by truck to a clinic down the street, she fit perfectly into the scene the city had rehearsed in theory for so long. That woman was Dahlia. The truck they pushed Sokolov into looked like any emergency vehicle thrown together in a hurry. Metal floor, crates marked as medical supplies, 2 civil defense men yelling conflicting instructions. As soon as the doors slammed, the atmosphere changed. A hidden panel slid aside, a pistol appeared, and the 2 real compound guards found themselves disarmed and unconscious before they had time to process that the tremor outside was less threatening than the strangers inside. Sokolov, breathing hard, eyes wide, watched his supposed rescuers transform into something else. Yossi spoke to him in fluent Russian, telling him calmly that the earthquake he felt was more theater than nature, and that the people who just stole him from his Soviet guardians could keep him alive if he cooperated, or make him disappear in a very different way if he did not. A small dose of vapor under the scientist's nose turned the rest of the ride into a blur. By the time he woke again, the city was a smudge on the horizon, seen through a porthole, the fishing boat around him creaking as it cut through the Mediterranean. Behind them, Alexandria's residents swept glass from their floors and tried to make sense of a night that seemed to make no sense at all. Official statements blamed a localized tremor, equipment malfunctions, and rumors. The Soviet compound filed furious reports about temporary confusion in evacuation procedures, never publicly admitting that one of their prize advisors had vanished somewhere between courtyard and safety route. On paper, the incident became a minor civil defense embarrassment, something buried under more urgent headlines. In the shadows, the consequences were larger. In a windowless room in Israel, Sokolov's notes were spread across a table, his knowledge slowly unpacked in exchange for a life under a new identity far from the fault lines of Soviet loyalty. The missile programs he had once strengthened would now be understood, and where possible, blunted. The operation proved something dark and powerful, that you could manipulate not just individuals, but the collective survival instinct of an entire district, turning natural fear into a cloak for precision action. It also left a trail that would never appear in any archive. Children who still woke up sweating years later when thunder shook the windows. Old men who refused to sleep on upper floors. Families whose trust in the very ground underneath them had been quietly cracked. That is the real aftershock of operations like Faultline, the part that does not fit neatly into strategic assessments and success metrics. So here is where I turn it back to you. If a state can fake a disaster, hijack emergency systems, and terrify thousands just to capture one man who might one day help build better weapons, is that a justified use of power or a line that should never be crossed, no matter the stakes? Tell me in the comments where you draw that line. Because in the world of covert warfare, the people designing these operations are betting that most of us will never even know the question was asked. And if this story changed how you think about what intelligence agencies are willing to do in the dark, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who loves these deep dives, and subscribe, because we are breaking down the operations governments deny and the machinery of power that runs in permanent shadow.